this computer.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We are once again in the Krishnacore podcast, episode number 17. And here we are also today with a special guest with Krishnadas Prabhu from California, Northern California. He's a vocalist of the band Invocation, that is one of the most recent bands that really has an influence from 108, Strain. I can hear a little bit, like really 90s stuff. So Hare Krishna, Mike. Hare Krishna, Krishnadas Prabhu. How are you guys?
Good, thanks. I'm good.
Nice to see you again.
Very good.
So Krishnadas Prabhu, nice to see you. First time that we see like this way, because long distance.
Oh
We
yeah,
can't
totally.
see each other face to face, but if you come to Europe one day, you will be more than welcome to play with your band.
Oh,
I
Jai,
really
thank you.
like it. I
Oh,
really
thank
like
you.
it. Like one of my favorite Krishnacore bands right now.
Oh, thank you, Prabhu.
We're talking also with Mike about this new wave of Krishnacore bands, like right now playing like Invocation or Back to Godhead or Corpo Strano from Italy. It's really nice stuff going on there. And so first of all, I would like if you can introduce yourself.
Okay, sure. My name is Krishna Das. I am a disciple of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Maharaj, and I am the vocalist of Invocation and one of the main songwriters for the band as well.
That's great. Can you because you guys were kind of formed, or the band before was a band called Crucial Measures.
Oh yeah.
And so you formed, I think it was in kind of 2017. That I've been listening to the demo, which is really good, and also there's a great live video of you from 856 on.
Oh, thank you.
So I've got to hear that you kind of decided to you kind of split in 2019 because you guys were at college. Was that right?
Yeah, so I guess there is a bit of continuity between the two bands because one of the guitarists from Crucial Measures is now also in Invocation. But yeah, so I started Crucial Measures started in when I was in college back in 2017 when I was living more in like Southern California, or I guess Central Coast would be more accurate to say. And yeah, that was a group of friends that I had out there. And yeah, 2019 came around and that's when we all graduated. And so, I came back to the Bay Area, which is where I'm originally from. And yeah, I didn't have the idea of like it having to be a continuity between the two bands. I thought like, oh, Crucial Measures is done completely now and I'm going to start a new band. And I had a friend in Santa Cruz who was kind of interested in Bhakti and he's from the scene and stuff. And I had played with one of his old bands a couple times before, and he wanted to start something, and that was kind of the beginning of me thinking of like starting like Invocation or doing a Krishnacore band that sounds like what Invocation, has become. And it didn't come until later that my friend who played guitar in Crucial Measures, or like I guess he filled in a lot for like two of the tours at least. He also lives around here as well, so we needed a guitarist as well. So it just, I don't know, it just made sense. I've been playing music with him since I was like in middle school. So he's been in like every single one of my bands. So that's kind of how it worked.
And this is Alessandro.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And kind of just thinking about the musical kind of influences from Crucial Measures, it was more kind of Cro-Mags.
Oh yeah.
More kind of sort of sort of that Age of Quarrel kind of feeling about it. And what made you, in terms of Invocation, you've kind of moved towards that, as Madhu just said, that kind of 108 kind of Prema kind of. What made you move towards that more kind of heavy kind of feel?
Well, I guess the reason was when I started, like when Crucial Measures started, I was really into like Youth Crew and Cro-Mags, like Age of Coral, especially. I had that on repeat a lot at the time. And like my first entrance into like hardcore punk in general was through, like kind of chronologically. So I was into like, the first wave of like punk bands, like, like Ramones, Sex Pistols, The Clash, and all that. And then I got into like, Misfits, Black Flag, and then Bad Brains and Minor Threat and all that stuff when I was like 14 or 15. And yeah, so I always kind of liked the sort of like less heavy, like faster, more energetic, I guess you could say, sort of stuff. But yeah, that kind of colored the like what Crucial Measures was, definitely more like originally I wanted it to be a youth crew band. Like that was the original idea was to be like a mindset, like almost a carbon copy of like Mindset or like was one of those React Records kind of bands. But some of the other folks in that band were into like metal and like like bands like Trapped Under Ice and that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well I like Cro-Mags. That's something we all like, kind of like. And so it's like a good middle ground. And also we all liked Inside Out, and I guess you could say that's sort of the beginning of like where that transitions, because being like we'd cover like Burning Fight and No Spiritual Surrender a lot. And so like and also just because being into liking Inside Out, and also I'm a pretty big fan of Braj Kishore, like not only as like a musician but as well as like as a devotee. Like his blog, The Inquirer, has been like incredibly helpful to me in the development of like my sadhana and like progressing on the path. Like I honestly could say that before I met my Gurudev, like that was like the main place that I was getting a lot of my inspiration and like I guess advice from, you could say, in following Krishna Bhakti, or trying to follow Krishna Bhakti. So I guess I have like this sort of long held admiration for Braj Kishore, both musically and as a devotee. And so um, because of that, I don't know, it just made sense. Like I like Inside Out, and then like I started looking into other stuff he did. Like, I kind of went backwards, listened to Beyond, and, also listened to like, 108. And I was like, oh, I was kind of more into Shelter at the time, like when Crucial Measures was ending. But, I started listening to 108 a lot more. And yeah, I don't know. Like it took a little bit for me to get used to it, because it also, a lot of it is kind of like experimental or sort of weird sounding, you could say, compared to a lot of other hardcore. Because coming from like listening to like Minor Threat and then listen to that, it's like, oh, it doesn't sound that similar in a lot of ways. But I could see the continuity. And yeah, I don't know, it just made sense. And I guess like lyrically, 108 was just a band that I felt was, I don't know, I felt like I could relate to those lyrics more than I could relate to Shelter lyrics, honestly. I don't know. I guess there's just something about like how it's like a bit more abrasive and just kind of like it's like darker, kind of more like uh I don't really know how else to describe it. The riffs that Braj Kishore writes are just really good. And um yeah, I don't know, that's kind of the continuity of it. I don't know if that makes sense, or if I'm,
No,
yeah.
it really does, and that
Yeah.
because I've tried to, I feel exactly the same way about you with 108 in comparison to Shelter, and we mentioned Prema, and I think Prema was one of those kind of really underrated bands.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic, and
Exactly.
and Raj Kishore is just such a just a great individual, along with
Mm-hmm.
K28, Kelly Lolita. Just these guys are just fantastic. And like you say, there's that abrasive nature. It's almost like a clarion call, isn't it? You see what Madhu, did you want to
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I feel the same way. Like I feel I could relate more to the lyrically to the 108 more than Shelter. But Shelter also has something special. I mean, it's like Krishna consciousness. It must be some variation.
Mm-hmm.
So people connect more with Shelter, more other people more with Chromax, other people 108. Some people will connect more with Invocation.
Oh,
It's like
Hmm,
there's a taste for everyone. That
yeah.
And yeah, it's like one of the things that you mentioned in one of the interviews, that it was kind of a bit of struggle to get the band together. You could talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it was kind of hard because when I moved back from college uh in 2019, I remember, yeah, it was just, I mean, I don't know, I guess like starting a Krishnacore band anywhere, I think, is difficult because, I mean, how many people are into that, right? You know, I mean, like even in the 90s, I mean, I wasn't there, but I could imagine like it's never been like the majority of the scene, right? So, it's like you got straight edge and then the subsections of straight edge, and then like kind of like Krishnacore fits as like a subgroup of that generally, right? So, um, yeah, it was difficult. Like I was envisioning when I first started this project that like, oh, it might be like, Balaram Shakti Prabhu's band, like Counterblast, how they were kind of like had a lot of members from different areas, like different parts of the country, United States and stuff. And I figured like, oh, I might have to do something like that even. Like I was like originally starting off thinking like, okay, I got my first, like the friend who I mentioned who lived in Santa Cruz who might play guitar, and then I had like a Buddhist friend who lives in like LA, Southern California area. I thought like, oh, he could play drums. Like I was like, kind of starting off with like very low expectations of like, I'm probably not even going to find other devotees to be in this band, like it's just going to be me writing all the stuff. And then like, hopefully people will be down to play in it. And if they relate to the philosophy, that's cool too. But yeah, I don't know. It was really hard. Like I had a friend who lives in Fresno area who from the beginning like said that they would play bass for us, and so that was kind of like a constant that I thought like, okay, that person's in, but then the person from Santa Cruz dropped out. Just I don't know, didn't want to do it. And then my friend in LA, understandably so, because it's like so far away from the Bay Area, it's like can't really do shows very often. So it's like then I was down to basically my friend from Fresno playing bass and myself, and even that's a couple hours away too. So that's not easy. And so I was kind of like sort of, I don't know, almost pessimistic about like in 2020 and like the first half of 2020. I remember like, oh, is this band even going to happen? Like I'm writing all these songs and it seems like there's like nobody who wants to do the band. But then I don't know, by some, I don't know, you want to call it Krishna's arrangement or whatever kind of whatever came about basically. So there was a show like earlier in 2020, right before the pandemic kind of hit full swing and the lockdowns and stuff. And I saw Earth Crisis in San Francisco, and one of my friends' bands opened for them. He was also a devotee at the time as well. And I was distributing books at their merch table. And what was it? And I distributed books to this one guy who I knew from another band from the Bay Area. Like I didn't really know him that well, but like I kind of I'd seen his band before and stuff, and I gave him some books. And months later, he DM'd me on Instagram saying like, "Oh, I'm like chanting now and like following the practices and." And then we were just kind of talking about like our enthusiasm for Krishna Bhakti and stuff. And he said he played drums, so I'm like, okay, this guy's gonna play drums for my band now. So we got that sorted out. And my friend who's playing bass said that they'd still be down, and um, so we were kind of practicing like that for a while. And when we recorded the Clarion Call EP, that's all we had at the time. Technically, like that was like on the recording itself. It was just my friend Bhaktishan on drums, and then myself on everything else, pretty much. But later on, towards the end of the year, when we were, around the time when we released the EP, that's when, figured like, oh, we need a guitarist. And so my friend Alessandro stepped in and, to fill that in. And, that was really good. So we had a full lineup. But, even after we had, that was like our first full lineup of people who were like dedicated, the drive from, going from Fresno to the Bay Area is still kind of tough. So it's difficult for that friend to, be consistently there. But luckily, my friend Sean had another friend from his previous band who is also, kind of into Krishna Bhakti as well, uh, and he was down to play bass, and so that's how the current lineup has come about. It's probably like a long, sort of drawn out story, but yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
And how people receive the music of Invocation? I mean, digitally, like on internet, because yeah, it's what I experienced also with my band. That uh, it was like after pandemic and all. What people say about the band, about the music, about the lyrics, about the Krishna band nowadays, and I know it's kind of can be kind of weird sometimes. You don't know how people will react to these guys. Since some people really have so many prejudices about about it. But how was your experience at the shows? Or I think some people write to you when they, I listened your album and it was
Mhm.
really great. Or you guys sucks. Don't keep your god out of hardcore. I don't know.
Yeah, so I would say that the response has been overall pretty positive. Yeah, by and large, very positive. Like when we released the EP, at the end of 2021, it was kind of funny. Technically, what was it? One of my friends who runs an Instagram page called Straight Edge Interviews. You might
Mm.
have heard of him. So he is, at least I don't know if he still is, but at least for some time was definitely like into like Krishna Bhakti as well. And somehow or another, like we put the EP on Bandcamp like the night before we were going to release it, just so we don't have any delays. And somehow he found it before we could make the official release, and he like posted about it on Straight Edge Interviews like Instagram. So I'm like, oh, this is like perfect. I guess it's like he already found it. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's a good initial sign, and I don't know. It seems like we've had a pretty steady stream of people who have like DM'd us, saying that they liked the record and that they think it's cool that there's new Krishnacore bands like doing what we're doing, and asking for recommendations about books to read and stuff. And in the link tree on the Invocation Instagram, we have like links to like you could buy books from my Guru Maharaj and stuff. So I keep that there for those who are interested as well. And um yeah, it's been pretty good. People have a lot of devotees I know who have been around for a while. It seems like they like it too, which that feels good. Like folks who were like there to see the original like Krishna core bands from the '90s saying good stuff to us like that. That makes me feel like I'm doing something right. Um, I would say, yeah, and even the folks in the scene who aren't devotees, I think a lot of them, maybe it's like for some folks it might be hard for them to wrap their head around some of these ideas, but I think a lot of them, like a lot of my straight edge friends, they look up to, like they respect it, and they look up to the Shelter folks and the 108 folks, anyways. So like I think it's going pretty well. The only things that I would say that have been like negative responses have been like I've seen like on some comment threads on like Facebook or something, like when No Echo posted that interview that my friend Thomas did with me about the Clarion Call. Like I remember seeing like some folks coming out of the woodwork being like, "Oh, I thought this trend died a long time ago. Like, oh, this is supposed to stay in the '90s. Like, is like or something about like I don't support cult music or whatever." And I'm just but it was cool though that I saw a lot of folks who weren't even devotees, just like straight edge folks I know from the scene, like just coming out to defend us and being like, what are you talking about? Like why are you hating on this band? Like they're not doing anything wrong. And I'm like, oh wow, that feels good that like
Yeah,
people like maybe they don't understand like the philosophy like super thoroughly, but they they understand that what we're trying to do is positive and they respect that. And they're willing to defend our name against slander from folks who are, spouting some ignorance on Facebook comment threads and stuff. So that's a good sign. And as far as the shows go, we've only played 3 shows so far. We did like a short run of shows with Broken Vow and Take It to Heart this past August, and those went pretty well. Like I was surprised that like a good amount of people were asking for books after the show, and like people took books and gave donations, and had good conversations with folks about like the philosophy, and people were asking like what's this all about. Like some people didn't even know like what Krishnacore was, or knew that that was a thing from the 90s. And yeah, I mean, and even the people who weren't necessarily interested in that aspect of it, I feel like there was definitely a good amount of folks who were vibing with it, at least in regards to like the music and stuff. And at least like the fact they could relate, like, oh, this is like a straight edge adjacent band, talking about like you know I mean, I'm vegan myself. Not everybody in the band's vegan, but like that kind of thing too. Like, we do like cover of like Killer the Soul by 108. So like, that's a instance for me to talk about that, kind of like do some more outreach to like, I mean, even if you don't relate to the philosophy, you can at least maybe relate to this, right? So yeah, I think the response has been good overall, and the little bit that hasn't been good, I think, is not really a deterrent to what we're doing at all. So yeah, we're just going to keep moving forward with it.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Mike.
I'm going to ask you one of Madhu's questions actually, because we give each other kind of questions to alternate with. But can you tell us how you got interested in Krishna, and where did it all start? Because I've got some lyrics here from Crucial Measures, the transcendent vision, and the dualities of life trapped inside every eye, these feelings that pull me away from the light. You were kind of, although you were influenced by Youth Crew, there was that kind of shift in lyrical content with Crucial Measures before you formed Invocation. So were you always a devotee? Where did you first become a Krishna devotee?
That's a very interesting question. So so it all kind of started, I guess, like right when Crucial Measures was like began, like early 2017. I remember maybe around March of that year, I had picked up the Bhagavad Gita for the first time, and that was kind of inspired by the fact that I had been listening to Youth Crew bands, listening to Cro-Mags and all that, and those are the bands that inspired me to like, especially like Youth of Today, and like a lot of the bands they inspired, like Mindset and stuff like that. That's what inspired me to become straight edge just a couple of years prior to that, and like become vegetarian, and aspire to become vegan one day. So I definitely had great admiration for those sort of bands. Like, I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like the No More music video and all that stuff, just had like a pretty profound impact on me. And so, I figured like, well, what else do these bands have to say? Like, and then I heard like Raghunath and Paramananda, they went on to form Shelter, and I'm like, oh, I like Youth of Today. What's this about? And so that's kind of the beginning of like me looking into the whole thing. And I was like started watching like Shelter interviews and stuff like that, and hearing them talk about like, oh, the Bhagavad Gita is really inspiring and this and that. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go check that out. And that was a really kind of, I guess, relative to my previous theological dispositions, kind of a big step out of my comfort zone, you could say, because for a good amount of my life, I was pretty like atheistic leaning, like agnostic. Like I don't think I had called myself like a hard atheist before, but I was like an agnostic that very much leaned in that direction. Just, I don't know, I guess all of the conceptions of divinity that I had heard of prior to that, I couldn't really relate to, or I don't know, I just felt like there were philosophical differences, or I just couldn't really subscribe to a lot of the things I had heard before that. And but I saw these bands that inspired me a lot, and I thought like, well, I should check this out because I used to like not be straight edge and not be vegetarian, and I used to think like, oh, I'd never be any of those things, and then like lo and behold, after a while of like being more open-minded about it, I got into all that. And then I thought like, well, how open-minded am I really? Like I feel like maybe I've like kind of closed the door on God or divinity, without actually looking at everything. I've never read the Bhagavad Gita, so I'll check it out. So I started reading that in early 2017, Bhagavad Gita as It Is by Srila Prabhupada. And some parts of it I could relate to, more thoroughly, like, especially like chapter 2 stuff, about like kind of, the fact that, we're not the body and we're not the mind, that we're Atma, transcendent of those things, kind of basic, Gaudiya Tattva, or I mean, that's, Tattva that's relatable to pretty much all schools of Vedanta. And, stuff like that. And like, being transcendent of the dualities of the material world, like the comings and goings of pleasure, pain, success, failure, etc. And like the idea of like acting in a dharmic way without attachment for the result, or like that kind of thing, I could relate to from the beginning, because I guess I had always felt like I wanted to dedicate myself to some higher ideal than just my own like sense gratification or the sense gratification of those who are like immediately related to me. But I never, I didn't really have like a super concrete idea of like where to direct that energy. And when I read that, it wasn't like everything immediately clicked, because when I still kind of had those sort of like agnostic samskars, you could say, where I was like, well, I don't know about the idea of God as a person, but like, so like reading that, I was like, okay, I like part of this, but I couldn't relate to all of it. So then I kind of became like a Mayavadi for a little bit. I started getting really into Advaita Vedanta, and like, studying like Shankaracharya's like uh, commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and like, going to those sorts of temples and being like, okay, well, I can at least subscribe to the idea that like God is like the ground of existence, and is like, that like everything is dependent on or rests upon like Brahman or that kind of thing. So it's like, that was a bit easier for me to digest. But yeah, so I was kind of rolling with that for a bit. And that was kind of when like you mentioned, the later Crucial Measures stuff started getting like these sort of Vedic lyrical themes, like you mentioned, like the idea of trying to transcend dualities of the material world and stuff. um yeah, that was kind of like coming during the middle and tail end of my flirtation with Advaita Vedanta. um but yeah, I don't know. It was just I was into that mainly because, well, one, I couldn't really relate to the idea of God as a person at the time. And I mean, I had, when I get into anything, I research it very thoroughly. Like, like anything hardcore, like theology or anything. And I don't know, like I had only been really aware of ISKCON at the time. And I don't know, like there's nothing against like ISKCON or anything in particular. It's just like different sanghas have different, moods and stuff, and different dispositions. And I mean, that also like varies from place to place as well. Like I mean, there's a lot of, some ISKCON temples are different than other ones. But I don't know, like I guess I just felt like the way Krishna Bhakti was explained in a lot of those books, I don't, like, now I can relate a bit more to it, because now I've been practicing for a bit more. And like, but like for a while, I don't know, like the way Srila Prabhupada would explain things, it just didn't click for me at the time. So I was kind of, it took a little bit, but I was still kind of interested in the idea of like as time went on, I still kind of had this idea that like, well, even if it's hard to relate to the idea of God as a person, you know, I mean, all these great like saints historically have related to God as a person. So maybe there is some value to doing that. Like, even if I don't understand it or I can't wrap my head around it, maybe I can at least try it, you know? So, like, I started like trying to read more into like bhakti in general, and then more specifically like Bhakti according to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and kind of, because of my influence from like reading The Inquirer from Braj Kishore, I thought like, okay, like this is a person who also kind of had some differences with the culture of ISKCON, for example, who like, he's part of like a different party of R now and stuff. And I feel like, oh, he seems like an intelligent person. And I started, reading his stuff, and I'm like, oh, it was hard for me to relate to some of that other stuff, but I can relate more to this, and so that was kind of like reading his blog was kind of the beginning of my, you could say, like transition from like impersonalism to personalism in terms of like, my uh, understanding of like Vedic philosophy and practice thereof. And I remember in 2018, I also found a book at a Barnes and Noble one day. It was called like, I think it was just called like Bhakti Yoga or something like that. And it was by Dr. Edwin Bryant, also known as Advaita Prabhu. He's a professor, I think, at Rutgers University. And I didn't know who he was or had any idea who he was. But like, I think that was like the first time I picked up a book where I was like, oh, like this is starting to click for me more. Like, I don't know, just the way that he explained it seemed to, I don't know, maybe it's like the academic sort of, language he would use, but, that was kind of the gateway for me to being more into like bhakti and like personalism. And so I picked up his translation of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And yeah, I just started reading that because I heard, well, I mean, Shravanam, like, hearing about the Lord is, one of the angas of bhakti, right? So it's like, oh, I should, familiarize myself with this. I mean, like, even if it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea of God as a person, like, I mean, I'm going to give this a shot. Like, so I, started, chanting Maha Mantra and started reading a bit, and just kind of like, I don't know, I definitely had a fascination for Krishna. Just, I mean, I don't know if it's just because of like some scars from like being involved with hardcore and like, so, the bands that I look up to, they're, Krishna Bhaktas and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. There was just time where I spent like trying to chant as sincerely as I could and kind of praying to Krishna and Radharani that like, like if this is real, like give me a sign, or sort of please, like, I don't know, like I just want to do the right thing. Like I just want to dedicate myself in the proper direction, or like the most fully uh fully meaningful direction that I possibly can. And yeah, I don't know. I think like in the beginning of 2019, that's when I, started like realizing like, oh, like this achintya beta abed tattva, this like oneness and difference, as propounded by, Gaudiya Sampradaya, you know, that seems to be a more comprehensive understanding of reality than just the Advaita Vedanta conception. Because like, I guess it's like I started off with seeing like, okay, Brahman is like the basis of reality, and like, all the, great like Upanishadic phrases about like aham brahmasmi and all that kind of stuff. Like, but then it's like, but is there more to it? Like my Gurudev, he often uses this um analogy of like karma being in like karmic implication is like negative numbers, and when you come out of that to like Brahman realization, it's like hitting zero. But like, is there a range of positive numbers beyond that? Like I remember like I hadn't heard him say that at the time, but that was something I kind of like nebulously been thinking of. Then when I heard him say it like about a year later, I'm like, oh, that's what I was thinking of, but he said it like better than I ever could have articulated it. Because I just thought like, well, like I think what it ultimately came down to, aside from, just like the praying to understand properly, it was also like, I just figured like, well, does it make sense that everything in the world is all the variegatedness, all the variety and like wonderful things in this world are manifested just so we can transcend them and negate them and like just dissolve our personhood into, you know, uh impersonal bliss, basically? Like, does that make sense? Or is there maybe some like purpose to everything, and that things can be used in a way that is conducive to spirituality, that's not exploitive, but is actually the inverse of exploitation, that's actually based on service. And so I thought, like, oh wow, like this idea of like eternally doing service to Bhagwan, like that sounds like more appealing ultimately than uh just like impersonally like residing in like a sort of voidistic eternity. So I figured like this is, whatever form this takes. I hadn't really studied the Gaudiya philosophy that thoroughly yet, but whatever form that takes, like, I think that's what I want to do. I want to, whatever, situation I happen to be in, I want to like strive for that ideal of like trying to serve like Bhagwan, or like, or the personal Brahman, you know, because that seems to be something that could be much more blissful than just merging into Brahman itself. So yeah, I kind of was uh, drawn in from there, and I started chanting Maha Mantra on a more consistent basis. And yeah, reading a bit more, started reading like Teachings of Lord Chaitanya by Srila Prabhupada, and I could relate to that a bit. Just hearing the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, um, those were really wonderful and inspiring. And um, yeah, and I remember I started trying to find like a Gaudiya like Sangha to associate with, and I, just like looking for other things, like, oh, is there other Sanghas in California that I can go to? And I found there's like this temple in Santa Cruz, the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, from the lineage of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And so I started going there, and I liked it there a bit more than some of the ISKCON places I had gone to, where I felt like I could relate more a bit there. Like, I started reading Srila Sridhar Maharaj's books, and, I liked, his Bhagavad Gita commentary, and, Search for Sri Krishna, Reality the Beautiful, all that sort of stuff. So I felt like I was inching more in the direction of like, okay, I feel like I am more like, okay, this Gaudiya Vaishnavism seems to be something very substantial. And it seems like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is like the embodiment, of like the highest ecstasy that any kind of saint, whether or not people will accept that he is, avatar of Krishna is another thing. But, whether or not people accept that, I think like anybody, who even studies like the lives of saints historically can recognize like there is something very otherworldly and powerful and magnanimous coming from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And, people have all kind of speculations about like, oh, all kind of mundane explanations about like, oh, people say like, oh, he's schizophrenic or whatever. It's like, well, I never heard of schizophrenia that's contagious by like, somebody touches you and you start getting ecstasy yourself and you start having the same experiences, right? And that like, so yeah, I don't know. I just felt like my faith was sort of growing steadily the more I started associating with devotees that I felt like I could relate to. Um, you know, but I remember in 2019 I was very much like in the mood of I want to, like, I think by the middle of 2019 I was very much in the mood of, okay, like I feel like Gaudiya Vaishnavism is the path for me. I still have a lot to learn, but I think that there is something very, very meaningful here, and I want to dedicate myself to that. And I need to find a guru, because that's like, kind of basic like tattva, right? And so, yeah, I started looking around, and I was like trying to find different sadhus that I, thought maybe might accept me, or, I could relate to. But, there's always just something where I was like, oh, well, I just don't feel like I totally fit in here. I don't totally fit in here. But somehow or another, that same like in August of 2019, one of my friends, his name's Paul, he's from the East Coast. His band Magnitude was on tour, and they came to uh, San Jose, California, and so they played a show there. And I remember I saw, he's wearing Tulsi beads, right? And I remember I was like, oh, there's another devotee here. So I was like, I felt like I should talk to him. And so I talked to him. And then eventually I found out, like, I was like asked, like, oh, like, do you study under a guru, or like, who are you associated with? And it turned out he was associated with the person who is the sadhu who is now my Gurudev, Srila Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Maharaj. And yeah, I was like, oh wow, I'd never heard of this person before. I mean, I had read a couple articles on the internet and stuff, but yeah, like those few articles I had read from him, they definitely moved me, unlike anything else I had ever felt before. Like before that, like stuff from Braj Kishore was like the most relatable thing to me, or like the Edwin Bryant, Advaita Das stuff. But once I started reading his articles, things really started to click with me. And then I was, kind of like wondered, oh, I don't know how I could meet him. And then somehow I meet somebody who's studying under him, So then he put me in contact with the rest of the folks in that Sangha. And then, kind of the rest is history from there. I just started reading more and more, associating with the devotees there, and you got initiated in 2021. So I guess that's kind of my from beginning to now progression in bhakti in a nutshell, I guess.
That's fantastic. I'm trying to find your guru's Bhagavad Gita, which I've got here somewhere. And I like you, I find it absolutely fantastic. And I really like, there's a book down there by Edwin Bryant as well. Edwin Bryant is a great character, isn't he? Such a learned guy. And your kind of journey kind of reminds me a little bit, I suppose, of everyone that we talk to. There's a different journey, but it's about putting together all these little jigsaw puzzle pieces, because most people kind of start off with Prabhupada and then say, yeah, because this is what happened for me. I find Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita okay, but I actually prefer Narayana Maharaj's Bhagavad Gita, and I know that for obvious reasons Madhu does, and there's no competitiveness there.
Yeah, totally.
It's just about
different
what we,
moods.
yeah, and I know that my writing about Krishnacore, I always use Narayana Maharaj's Bhagavad Gita, but then the Srimad Bhagavatam, obviously you always use Prabhupada. That book by Edward Bryant, I can't remember what it's called. I've got it downstairs, which is about the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a really thick blue book, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's called like Bhakti Yoga Tales and Teachings from the Bhagavad Purana or something like that.
It's something like that, and it's highly recommended. It's such
totally.
a fantastic book.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and find a jumper to put on, because we can't put our heating on over here in the UK because it's so cold, because it's so expensive. But Madhu, did you want to continue?
Yeah, I can totally relate to it, because yeah, as we mentioned before, the Krishna consciousness is a family and variety, and every sadhu, every acharya, and every devotee is unique and has a specific speciality, So I totally can relate. For example, I feel the same as Mike. Like I can relate so much to the Srila Narayan Goswami Maharaj, Bhagavad Gita, my Param Gurudev. So yeah, and this reminds me, when you were talking about the process, one of the things that your Guru Maharaj says, one of the first things I heard from him, it was that we don't teach to believe in God, we teach to realize what is God, So that's the word process, how it's a process. It's not like you take diksha and, oh, is everything okay? Now I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
It's not even thinking prematurely that you are Manjari or this, and you get this name, Rasagulla Manjari, and this, and then you are meditating on. No, it's not like that. It's not artificial. So it's. And I always felt that it's about relationships. It's like Bhagavad Gita speak about the relationship of guru and disciple. It's not that to get close to the guru, you must start with the president of the temple, and then the president of the temple speak the community of the who controls the world sangha, and then you go to your guru, and that's something very special. It's something very sweet,
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your words about your journey. It's
Oh, thank you.
really amazing. I feel completely identified by that.
Oh, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess building off of what you were just saying, um, yeah, like you really like summarized it pretty well. Like one thing that was kind of like an obstacle to the development of my faith early on was kind of like I had always heard of faith, at least how other people from like other kinds of spiritual traditions or theological schools of thought explaining faith is like you just believe something. But like, it's like in the Vedic tradition, we kind of have like like Shraddha is like not really, it can be translated as faith, but there's something more to be said about
yeah,
like it's experiential, right? It's like it's this like firm conviction like that, like it wasn't just like I just started believing stuff. It's like, oh, this philosophy makes sense. I'm going to apply it to my life, and I see that it's giving me certain results, and I'm having certain experiences. Like, I think I heard Raghunath one time in an interview explain, like, well, I can't say that I know or have fully realized all of the imports of like what the Shastra says, but like, it's like you follow the road, you follow the map, and you're on the road, and you see like, oh, it says when you get here, there's going to be a sign. And it's like, oh, that's what it says. And then you follow it, and then you keep seeing like, oh, the map is legit because you could see that the map is telling you things and you're experiencing those things and it's making sense. So, it's that was kind of like a thing where I'm like I was like, okay, this isn't a conception of faith that makes sense to me. And I'm like, I can actually like really believe it because I can experience it.
exactly. And everything comes by association, by sadhu sangha.
Mhm.
I just
Mhm.
talking. You were talking also about the editions of the Bhagavad Gita. I also have here like the original Bhagavad Gita of Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj.
Mhm.
I have also Bhagavad Gita of Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, and my parent guru is Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And all of them are really amazing. I reading it like slowly, right? Because yeah, many Bhagavad Gita. So and
Jai.
you can always take something from it. That's really amazing.
Oh,
And
Jai. Yeah, of
so deep,
course.
so deep, everything.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
sometimes explain it like in different ways.
Mhm.
And some people, yeah, some people say like apparently contradictions about some subject. But I remember Shamarani did it once when she was here in Prague, and she spoke about how to harmonize apparent contradictions, and it's sometimes acharyas speak in a different way, like different words, like I know, for example, someone can say, don't drink, she gives this example, like, don't drink dirty water. And the others say, drink clean water, So it's,
Mhm.
it's like something so special. And yeah, like always when you read about the life and example and service of the Acharyas, you always get some inspiration from it. That's so really amazing.
Jai. Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
So thanks for sharing your experience.
Yeah.
And we'll go to the next question.
Okay.
How do you see the hardcore scene? Like, for example, the strike age. I don't know if you have some political background back in the day or right now. So how you see it?
Oh, I guess with the hardcore scene, I mean, that's something that I've been into since I was like, an early teenager, like I mentioned, like I was like 15 or so. I think on my 15th birthday or something, I got like the Minor Threat discography and like the Bad Brains, like self-titled, all that stuff. And, so it's been a big part of my life for a while. It's probably the music that I relate to the most. And it's given me a lot of positive inspiration, kind of helped me in when times are tough and given me like inspiration to like persevere to like do the things that I feel like are actually worthwhile with my life and dedicate myself to ideals that I think are good for myself and others. So yeah, I think I mean, I guess maybe I'm not as involved with the scene itself nowadays, just because I feel like I've kind of been diving deeper into my sadhana and that just takes up more time, like, chanting more and reading more. And just trying to, make progress on the path and such. So I guess in that way, maybe I'm not as involved with the scene, but I still go to shows and I still like to support my friends' bands and stuff. And um, I think there's still a lot of good stuff going on in the scene right now. Like, the bands that I went on tour with, Invocation toured with this past August, I would say that those are probably some of my favorite bands that are around currently. Broken Vow, Take It to Heart. I mean, there's, good bands in the Bay Area right now too. I mean, you might have heard, there's a lot of, bands doing big things from around here, like friends here in bands like, Scowl or like Field of Flames. Those are good bands that I think are doing something really solid. So yeah, I think yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the hardcore scene is in a pretty good place overall. I mean, I think I don't know, maybe I'm a little biased because I like Youth Crew a lot. That's always been like that style has always just been something that's really I've always liked a lot. And so maybe I kind of miss that there's not as much Youth Crew around nowadays as
Yeah,
there was, like,
yeah,
say for
man.
example, yeah, from
Yeah,
like from
at least
like,
here in
the
Europe, like we have
oh yeah.
protein,
Oh,
protein.
okay.
My friends also which are members of Make Peace,
Oh yeah.
they're like really good bands, and
Hmm.
they're really killing the no, they are amazing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
totally. I guess I was
yeah,
mainly speaking for like my like it regionally, like where I'm at, there's not a whole lot of youth crew bands. But yeah, you're right. There are quite a few over
yeah.
where you're at in the world. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff going on. I think um yeah, I don't really know what else I could say about it other than
Yeah.
I don't know. Hardcore scene's given me a lot of good ideas that I've applied to my life, like, straight edge veganism. Uh, I guess like for a lot of people, it's like hardcore is also pretty thoroughly tied to like, like radical politics and like, like leftist politics and stuff. And that's something I've always related to as well. And like the idea of like, striving to, overcome like different systems of like, oppression and stuff for, different people. And I mean, it's just I think the hardcore scene's been a pretty positive thing for me overall. I mean, I think that um maybe it's different for different people, and it varies from different region to region and stuff, and in different subcultures. But I mean, at least the way I've been involved with it, I think it's been a good thing. And um yeah, I mean, I look forward to continue to being involved with it. And maybe the relationship, it evolves over time as I get more into my bhakti sadhana. It's like, because the idea with like Invocation, for example, like I kind of felt like after Crucial Measures, I just thought like, well, if I'm going to do another band, I want to like dovetail it more thoroughly to my like, you know, bhakti related like ideals, and like,
Yeah.
trying to spread those ideas. And, kind of also as an outlet for my own emotions um, and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of how I feel like I'm trying to make my contribution is, doing a band that I think is beneficial to myself, and um, hopefully inspiring others to look into the path or even take up the path themselves. So it's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, yeah. I always when I'm touring with the band with Life, like is I used to see people who are somehow connected with the Krishna consciousness, but they never went too deep into the philosophy, like But I know they still wear kantimalas, or they
Hmm.
speak about a little bit, that we are not this body, and a little bit of
Hmm.
philosophy. Sometimes they make questions, and we can see this kind of legacy of old bands like Cormax or 108 or Shorter. But the thing is, one of the questions we made to the people here who come to the podcast is like, how it happening? How is a hardcore and Krishna consciousness came together in one moment? It's something like apparently completely different things, and how it comes together, according to your experience, how you see it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a that's a good question. I feel like yeah, that comes up a lot, especially when I show show people who like aren't as involved with like the scene and stuff. Like I show them like, oh, Krishnacore is a thing. People are like, what? How is that even possible? Like, yeah, I mean, I think it might look very like diametrically opposed on the surface or something, because usually think when you think like Hare Krishna, you think of like the 60s and like hippies and all that kind of stuff. But like, yeah, I think it actually relates a lot in the way that I heard Kayla Lolita Davy, Kate '08 from the band 108. She explained it pretty well once on an interview I heard a couple years ago, where she said like, well, I mean, like all branches of like dharmic philosophy, like any kind of Vedanta or even Buddhism, for example, they all kind of agree that the material world is a place that is pervaded by suffering, right? The material world is like full of like the 108 album title, like the threefold miseries, all that kind of thing, like that the material world is pervaded by suffering, anxiety, attachment, all of these kind of things that like I mean, it just makes it, I don't know, I think it makes sense that people use hardcore as an outlet for that kind of thing because, I mean, a lot of hardcore, like what is it about? It's like, expression of like raw, unfiltered anger and frustration for, you know, uh, difficulties in one's life, whether that's personal or like from the political structures or from oppression from whether it's like patriarchy or capitalism or whatever, different things, like people have some expression of like anger and frustration for the way that things are, whether it's like it's from the external world or within like their own mind, right? So in that way I would say that it makes sense that like like punk has always, kind of like not been afraid to like look at those things, and hardcore in particular is a subgenre of punk, like kind of talking about like, well, also like not only that, but how do we find solutions to these problems, right? Like what are some like ways we could solve. So like, you see that, for example, in like, it's like why is it that like so many at so many hardcore shows, you see like people passing out zines or like these different, or political flyers or things like that, right? Because it's like they have some idea of that there's something wrong with the material world, that there's something wrong with, for example, like take for example with like straight edge, it's like that the drug that like, the use of drugs and like the culture around that and the proliferation of like alcohol and use of like all these industries that are like trying to like poison and dull the masses and stuff, or like um it's like veganism or whatever, like basically at the end of the day, like it comes down to there's some definite things wrong with the material world, and that the material world is run by a lot of kind of asoric non-dharmic uh people, and so like um yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense that like, well, Krishna Bhakti is offering a real comprehensive solution to that, not just a political solution. Because I mean, before I came to Bhakti, I was very much, I mean, not that I'm not anymore, but that like maybe it's taken a back seat to my sadhana. But before I came to Bhakti and I was like more atheist, agnostic leaning, I was much more involved with like studying like leftist political theory and like stuff about like, oh well, how can we solve the problems of this world politically. But then there's an interesting thing I thought of once, or I mean, I guess like once I started becoming a devotee, I just thought of like my Guru Maharaj said this like better than I could ever articulate it. Another example of him doing that, where he said like, it's not that the material world has problems, it's that the material world is a problem. Is that samsara is a problem. It's problematic in and of itself. Even if you have like a utopian society where like, there's no oppression, everybody has that what they need materially to, live a healthy and long life, and, all that kind of stuff. And, people have plenty of sense gratification, like that still doesn't solve birth, old age, disease, and death, right? So it's not like, it's not solving the thing that is like uh at the root of like what we're looking for. Like we're not going to get ultimate satisfaction from anything, even if we do like arrange things in the most like egalitarian the way politically, you could say. So you know, kind of coming to that realization, I just figured, well, I mean, the Bhakti Marg just seems to be such like a comprehensive solution to, it's like what everybody is angry about, what everybody's frustrated about. Everybody wants happiness that is lasting, that is not dependent on external circumstances, that is like, ever increasing, right? And we continually find that the material world is, not only full of things that don't fulfill that, but are even antagonistic to that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that hardcore as a music genre that can be utilized as a means of expressing emotion for in regards to, like one's frustrations in the material world and aspiration to be, Krishna Bhakta and stuff. I think I don't know. I think when it's put that way, it makes a lot of sense. It's like there's problems to be solved, and here's we recognize that, and here's a solution. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it does, and it leads on really, really clearly into looking at Clarion Call as an EP. And what one thing that's quite apparent from the 1990s is that notion of kind of Krishnacore aesthetic. You've got the sampling of Prabhupada and the Maha Mantra, and you've got the inclusion of the kind of bhajan. And just looking at Clarion Call, it's just great right from the start, which I've got the tracks here, which is Darshan, Rebirth, Mirage, Dizzy, Shraddha, obviously Killer of the Soul as well. And the EP is just kind of full of bhakti. And you've got that kind of Darshan right at the start. What made you pick the bhajan? I think there are two bhajans there, which is the Darshan is Thakur's Sri Gaura Nityananda Daya. And then in Shraddha, there's also the Jeev Jago. Is that how you say it? Which is back to the Vod Thakur's, which means wake up, sleeping soul. What made you pick those two bhajans in particular?
Oh, that's a good question. So it took a bit of time for me to figure out which ones I exactly wanted to use. I think from the beginning, I definitely felt like I wanted to have some bhajans in at least like one song. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Like I take forever to do anything, so like it took some time to sort that out. But I think I remember. I think there is a devotee I follow on Instagram, and he posted like a live stream from I think one of the temples out in like Utah, Salt Lake City, I think. And I heard there's a devotee out there, Rai Kishori Devi, I believe. Yeah, she was singing that bhajan, and I just, after reading the translation of those first few lines, like, it's like that Gaura and Nityananda are like the Param Karuna, right? Like that they're like the highest like compassion, mercy, right? I just thought like, well, that's a perfect way to start an EP. Like, I mean, like if I'm gonna, for this band, I just thought like, well, I mean, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu, you know, I mean, I feel like how could I not try to offer some pranam to them in the beginning of my band's career, you could say. So I thought that the first couple lines of that bhajan were kind of perfect, like introduction. It's like before anything else, everybody got to hear that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu are, the high trying, the most merciful, most supremely merciful, and that they're here to deliver us and to give us prema. And I guess with the second bhajan, I don't know. I guess like with the way the lyrics were coming out for the song Shraddha, which that bhajan appears on, I just noticed there's a lot of parallels, like the first part of those lyrics were kind of addressing you know, how sometimes people would talk down about Krishna Bhakti, or they'd be like, oh, you're crazy and all this kind of thing. And they'd say like, you know, they'd say all this kind of ignorant stuff without even understanding the philosophy or even trying to understand it at all. And like, you know, kind of, you know, trying to invoke like the the things that Srila Prabhupada said about like, you know, the materialist is like somebody in like a blind well, and you know, that kind of thing. And just kind of how like, yeah, no, I'm trying to wake up from the, you know, samsara, trying to wake up from my ahamkaric like material conditioning, trying to like, you know, be, you know, what I'm ultimately meant to be is, you know, a servant of the servant of the servant of, you know, ad infinitum of you know, Sri Radha Govinda, right? Um, so I figured like, oh, the Bhaktivinoda Thakur bhajan where he says Jeev Jago, it's like, oh, that's perfect. It makes sense. It's like the calling out of like, you know, wake up sleeping souls, and it kind of ties into the title of the EP itself, like Clarion Call, because it's like you know, I got that name from a magazine that my Gurudev used to
That's right. Yeah.
publish back in the, I believe, 1980s, and I think, you know, it just felt kind of perfect. It's like, you know, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his, you know, devotees within the parampara are, you know, calling out to the conditioned souls, you know, to take up this practice, to take up, you know, the process of Harinam Sankirtan, and you know, to surrender to Krishna and all of that. Um, so yeah, I felt like, okay, like the last line say, I must answer this clarion call. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, the Jeev Jago is kind of like, that's, you could say like that is the call, right? They're being asked to wake up. So that's how
It
I
was
look at it.
it was really sorry. It was really interesting when I looked at the Bhajan, especially for the Darshan track, and I noticed you said, as you said, you didn't actually include the whole of the first verse. You just included the first two lines, and that kind of indicated to me that you really, you know, yeah, you are a perfectionist. That you just wanted those two lines there. You didn't just kind of, the easy thing would have been, I suppose, just to have included the whole verse, but you didn't decide to do that, and it kind of rang true with me. But yeah, this guy is a bit of a perfectionist. And
Nice.
the lyrical content all the way through. So I've got the lyrical content for Shraddha, mercy extending from the absolute reality extinguished from illusion and doubt. Um, mercy extending in transcendent sound of deliverance, no longer ignored, this vision will endure. And the same with rebirth, um, living in a dream of pain and loss. Can you talk us through some of these lyrics? And these lyrics directly kind of influence from what you've read in the Gita and elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Let me just pull them up again just to make sure I'm remembering them properly. I feel like I'm a pretty wordy guy, so there's a lot of lyrics to some of these songs. Did you want me to go song by song, like from the beginning, or is like just those two, or?
Oh well, yeah. Just pick one. If I know the interview that you did, was it with the No Echo? You
Yeah,
say,
no echo. Yeah,
yeah. I
I
think
was
that
talking about rebirth. Yeah.
they talked about. So if you want to talk about rebirth again, that's absolutely fine by you. Yeah, just pick one.
Okay. All right. I guess. Let me see. Um. Uh. I think I'll talk about Shraddha since you know, I feel like I explained
Yeah,
rebirth
okay.
pretty thoroughly in that interview with No
Yeah.
Echo. So with Shraddha, you know, like we just mentioned, like, you know, the beginning, it's like, you know, Jeev Jago, Gora Chanda Bole, like, you know, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is calling out to the conditioned souls, you know, to wake up, right? So, you know, I think that's pretty self-explanatory from what I just explained in the last question, but you know, and then so the next lines like decry and judge truth from your blind well as if I've lost my mind and soul. Like, I mean, I'm sure that, you know, some, you know, you guys might be able to relate to that as well. I mean, I've definitely met people who thought like, you know, what are you doing? Like, this is crazy. Like, why would you dedicate yourself to this? Like, what is, like, especially like, thankfully not a whole lot of people from the scene, but I mean, like I mentioned, there's still people who come out of the woodwork on comment threads to be like, these people are crazy, this is some cult music, blah blah blah, whatever, right? So, there's still people who are detracting of it, and I mean, still there's people, I know who like aren't have not said the most favorable things to me, let's say, about my decision to be involved with Krishna Bhakti, and to the degree that I'm trying to, and such. And so, like, it's like so many people, they criticize things that they don't even understand, that they've never even read about or tried to understand. So, like, people think like, oh, you've lost your mind, you've lost your soul. It's like, well, no, I'm actually like realizing what my soul is, and I'm actually using my mind in the most like thorough way possible to understand that. So that's like, so I kind of just wanted to point that out from the beginning. And then, next line's like speculation, so proud and jaundiced. Like, you might have heard Srila Prabhupada use that analogy of like a materialist is like somebody who has jaundice, right? It's like even, it's like but like the cure for jaundice or something, I think I've heard something along these lines, is that like, even though if you have jaundice and you taste something sweet, it doesn't taste sweet, but you need to keep taking the sugar cane, and then eventually it'll cure the jaundice. So in the same way, like the holy name is like that. So like a person in stage of like nam aparad or nam bas, like they don't really have any like a much substantial taste for the holy name, but it's like you keep taking and you become purified, right? So then eventually then you taste like, you know, the full extent of the ecstasy that the holy name contains within itself, right? So, so I kind of figured like, oh, that's a interesting like Prabhupadism that I wanted to include. Like, it's like people are in, like speculation, so proud and jaundiced. It's like trying to uh, think of like, oh, that's something Prabhupada, might have said. And then from a virtual life, I must reach beyond this hoax. So, yeah, I mean, like just going on about how like so many people, they live their lives, thinking that they are this body, that they are this mind, and that the only purpose of life is to simply satisfy the desires that arise in the mind in relation to the body. And maybe they have some desires beyond that, like maybe they have some altruistic sense of like, I should do good things for my family, or I should do good things for my society, or oppressed groups of people, or for or for animals, or anything like that. It's like, it's like all that, it's like the closer, the more expanded your circle goes, like the closer you get to become more dharmic. But like, it's like still there's like, without understanding like the soul, like without understanding like who or what we are, like all of our attempts to do good will fall short of like perfection, right? So in that way, it's like trying to reach beyond the virtual life of like my ahamkaric identity. It's like I must reach beyond the hoax that I have conditioned myself over countless lifetimes to live in, to the idea that I am, this person of, that this nationality, of this age, of this ethnic background, of this gender, or whatever. It's like, to reach beyond the hoax of all of that, and to reach for something like real and substantial and enduring that is unchanging, right? So that's kind of how I figured like the end of that beginning part just made sense. Like, okay, I'm trying to get out of the material world, and now the next part is kind of me talking about like, like mercy extending from the absolute, reality distinguished from illusion and doubt. That's like, I guess, like referencing like, studying the shastra, right? Like the, studying the shastra in the company of sadhus. Like, it's like, I think I was thinking of like all of the wonderful um uh guidance that I have gotten from my Guru Maharaj, leading up to that point, and that I, continue to uh, to get, and I'm so grateful for. Like, just thinking about like, oh, this is Krishna is sending an agent, both passive and active agent. Like, it's like sending like the book Bhagavatam and the person Bhagavatam, right? Like these two uh, agents to as a form of like concentrated form of mercy uh, to get me to take up the path to ever increasingly follow, to take up the path and to follow it into eternity, right? So like it's like mercy extending from the absolute, reality distinguished from illusion and doubt. Like this is something that is, yeah, beyond illusion and doubt, that like anything else in the material world, because of the defects of our mind and senses, and like everything, and so many things can be doubted and such, but like, without getting into too much detail, I would say that, in those times leading up to when I took up the path, like going from Advaita Vedanta into, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and I was kind of praying, to their lordships to like, please give me a sign. Like there was a moment I had where I was chanting the Maha Mantra, where I had this kind of like very powerful, like experience that I can't even really describe it, other than it felt more real than anything else that I had felt before. Just like in the analogy in the Upanishads, right? They talk about like, the waking and the dreaming state, right? Like, it's like, a person, you know, you can't give like a philosophical like reason why, for example, you think that what you're experiencing when you're awake is more real than what you're experiencing in a dream. It's just kind of a self-evident truth. Like it's something that's so like it's just self-evident, right? And so in the same way, that experience I had when chanting the Maha Mantra, like calling out to their lordships, trying to understand and wanting to go in the right direction, that feeling was more real than my waking experience. So I thought like, oh yeah, no, this is something that like, I can, philosophically doubt this and that. I can intellectualize this or that, but it's like when you have something, happen to you and you have experiences, it's like that feel more real than anything else. It's something really hard to refute, right? So that's kind of what I was thinking of there, in mercy extending and transcendent sound of deliverance. So of course that's the referring to the Maha Mantra, and then no longer ignored, this vision will endure. So like for countless lifetimes, right, the jiva has been uh kind of turning away from God, turning away from divinity, and trying to enjoy in the material world, and going up and down the karmic ladder, going round and around in the samsaric wheel. But I figured like, well, I think this also, I wrote this relatively right before I took initiation. Like I think around the time when I wrote these lyrics, I think had just written to my Guru Maharaj asking for initiation. So I think this was kind of like I was, thinking like, okay, I want to make a comprehensive solution to the problems of like my material conditioning, and I want to dedicate myself to the highest ideal, right? So I figured like I've been ignoring this for so long. I need to stop ignoring it. And that experience that I had initially, that kind of helped cement my decision to take up this path. I thought like, well, if I keep doing this, that vision will endure and it will increase to more and more uh, uh, ever more variegated and more detailed degrees, right? So that's kind of where I was going with that. And, the next few lines, like Shraddha, a light to guide me home. So it's like, yeah, I mean, ultimately, as, Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself talks about, like, in a sense, like Shraddha or like faith, or I mean, yeah, you could find like other Gaudiya acharyas will talk about this too, but, it's like, you could say like the practical like expression of Shraddha or like faith is like Sharanagati or surrender, because it's like if you have faith in something, if you really believe in something, and you dedicate and you really like feel like inside like, I want to do something about this, then it's like, yeah, you're going to do something about it, right? You're going to like do things that are favorable to bhakti, you're going to reject things that are unfavorable. And not that I'm like perfect or anything, or I'm not even claiming to be that whatsoever, but like the ideal of at least trying to do that, right? Like the idea of like holding on to that conception of like, it's like I have this Shraddha that like has come by the grace of sadhus, right? Like my Guru Maharaj, and my god siblings and other so many other devotees, that I've encountered. It's like this um this Shraddha, this faith, this conviction, and the corresponding actions that come from that, that is the light that will guide me, home, Goloka, right? To attaining the ideal, in the spiritual world and such. And then the next line, like Gauranga, life beyond this hoax. So like, in the beginning of the EP, I call out the name of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, right, in Darshan in the beginning of that song, kind of as like, well, it's like reminds me of like that old bhajan of like, Bhaja Gauranga, Kaha Gauranga, Laha Gauranga Namare, like, that one about like, it's like I think Nityananda Prabhu was the one who composed that, where it's, saying like, take up the name of Gauranga. It's like, he is Radha and Krishna together, right? It's like, so I figured like, okay, kind of like coming full circle, the beginning of the EP, I call out the name of Gauranga. At the end of the EP, I will call out the name of Gauranga. And, that by his mercy coming through, his divine agents, such as my Guru Maharaj, it's like I, will achieve a life beyond this hoax of the material world. And, the last line, I must answer this clarion call. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. It's like the Jeev Jagos at the beginning, and after all this deliberation, all of this, all of the lyrics that came between those two things, now I'm like, I must answer the clarion call. I must, at that time, I was, preparing to, take initiation. So it's like I must answer the clarion call in that way, and then I must ever increasingly answer the clarion call, and try my best to live up to the standards and the ideals that I'm trying to uh, trying to pursue. So that's kind of my explanation of Shraddha.
That's fantastic.
That's an explanation.
That is an explanation and a half. That's great.
Oh, thanks, Prabhu. Sorry, I can be a little wordy. I don't know if you guys could tell. I could once you get me going, I can just keep going about all kinds of things.
This is what it's about, isn't it? And you're obviously extremely you really do know your stuff. You're very knowledgeable about this stuff, and that comes across so well, honestly.
Thank you, Prabhu. I try. I really try.
Yeah. Oh, Madhu, would you like to? Have you got anything?
I think Krishna's Prabhu, you could say some final words for the people who are listening, watching the podcast. Whatever you want to say.
Okay. Let's see. See. Well, I guess I'm before I go into that, I guess I was wondering like, is the main audience of people who watch the podcast, is it like mainly like people who are like into Krishnacore or like hardcore scene in general? Because I'm trying to figure out like what would be the best thing to say
We
to
have
different
everything.
audience. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's see. Final words. This is always tough. I guess final words would be, if you haven't looked into Krishna consciousness, Krishna bhakti much before, I highly recommend looking into it. And not just and don't just do it in a cursory way or in a kind of like casual way, but try to get in contact with some folks who maybe have some standing in the practice, and have some conversations with them, and try to understand it. And because I mean I feel like that's something that I definitely would have benefited from, like in the very beginning of when I got into all this, having a good relatable association right off the bat. It took some time for me to find that. So yeah, I would say that this path is an incredibly sublime and wonderful and transcendental path and ideal. And I think that different people come to it from different ways. I obviously came to it through like the hardcore scene and stuff, and I'm sure that many of the people watching this podcast, coming to it from that angle. But yeah, I would say that in general, even if it doesn't come down to people coming to this particular path, like any attempt to understand like metaphysical or theological truths, whether that comes from like a Christian standpoint or a Muslim standpoint, or other types of Vedic philosophy, or whatever, it's like any attempt to try to understand who we are, and what our purpose is in life, and how we can do good for ourselves and others. I think that that is the most worthwhile thing that some of the most worthwhile things we can ever do with our time, right? And then from there, knowing like how to apply, what we've learned practically. So yeah, I would say that is something I would say to everybody, that if you haven't looked into this, or maybe you aren't really that familiar with spirituality of any kind, or if you're, just curious, just look into it, with an open mind and an open heart, and see what works for you. And for those who, might be already into the tradition and such, I definitely recommend, keep chanting, the holy name, keep studying the Shastra, uh, follow the instructions of, sadhus and one's Guru Maharaj, whoever that may be for each individual person. And yeah, and just try to embody, like, what was that, Madhu Prabhu, do you know that one quote from Bhaktivinoda Thakur about, like, I think it translates out to being uh like the essence of Dharma is like to chant the holy name, and to have to do good to, or have kindness for other living entities, right? Like it's like Jiva Doya Krishna Nam, something, I forgot the exact quote.
Oh,
Apologies
yeah,
for that.
you got me.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think just embody that, like, do good to yourself, do good to others, chant the holy name, keep an open mind, and yeah, love other living entities the best that you can. I think that's my message overall, um, as best as I can muster up at this moment spontaneously.
Well, I think that's absolutely fantastic, and it's a great way to end this. I don't know about Madhu, but I found this pretty inspirational, to be honest with you. I think you're a
feel the
pretty
same way.
inspirational individual, and it's been fantastic just listening to you. It's been
Thank you, Prabhu.
It's been brilliant.
I feel the same way, and sorry, Mike, interrupt you.
So,
Mike?
Yeah, no, it's just been
okay.
It's just been a real eye opener, and for someone who's, as we were talking about you putting the tilak on and saying, that I suppose I'm a little bit like you when you were in Crucial Measures. Really, I'm a bit of a kind of agnostic kind of devotee, and I wear the beads and I read the Gita, but I haven't been initiated at all. And for some reason, even when I don't read about Krishna or read the Bhagavad Gita for a while, it always kind of draws me back. It always pulls me back. There's something there. There is something there, and I feel more at home in that kind of literature. And so just listening to you, and Madhu's very much the same. It's a bit of an inspiration for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Krishna's Prabhu, for sharing your experience with us and your realizations. It's pretty nice, really nice to listen to you. Really inspiring. I hope you can come to Europe soon.
Yeah.
With your band or without your band, doesn't matter. It's really nice to see what you really experience. We were talking about the experience more than just something what you believe or something. It's like when someone asks if you believe on the flat earth, or you believe in the, that's even something really common. It's a really common thing even in between the devotee cycles. If you believe in, I know how it's in English, but life in other planets,
Yeah.
and it's a worldly stuff. We are here. We are so lucky to share something. What it essentially means bhakti, Shuddha bhakti, and that's what we want to get. So I'm really thankful to you, Prabhu. I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, Mike, you want to say something more?
That's it. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, both of you, Prabhus. This is great opportunity. I'm so grateful to have had this chance to speak with both of you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and Jaya Gurudev, Shri
Ah,
Mahaprabhu Ki Jai.
Prabhu, by the way, do you have some plans with the band or with the future?
Kind of. I have a couple song stems in the works right now, but I might want to, ideally it would be great to release like a full LP one day, but it takes me a long time to write songs, as you can
Yeah.
tell. So it might be a while, but that's an ideal. And if I can't do that, do an EP, release like a couple song demo or something. And we're gonna keep trying to play shows. We have a show coming up on January 14th, so
All right.
there's that one too. But yeah, other than that, yeah, the recording that I just mentioned and keep playing shows. That's really all that we have in the near future. So
Brilliant.
Nice.
Great.
So thanks
So
again.
yeah.
we see you in Europe soon.
Oh, Jai. Oh, I really hope so. Jai, Dandavat
Jai
Pranam.
Krishna.
Krishna.
Haribol, Gaura Hari.
Jai Shri Radhe.